Have you ever stopped to consider that the people who hurt you the most might not be the obvious ones? That the real danger might not come from those who openly mistreat or betray you, but from the quiet, gentle, and kind souls who smile at you every day? What if the most emotionally destructive people in your life are not villains, but unconscious forces wearing familiar faces? We've been taught to spot danger by looking for red flags: manipulation, aggression, lies, betrayal. But real danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it walks into your life calmly. It asks how your day was. It listens. It sympathizes. And all the while, it's planting seeds, not of malice, but of unconscious projection, of unseen wounds, of borrowed pain. You might think you're being a good friend, a good partner, a good listener, but what if you're not helping? What if you're absorbing? What if the sadness you've been carrying isn't even yours? What if your exhaustion, your guilt, your quiet resentment all came from someone else's shadow lodged in your psyche? Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." What if your fate is being quietly rewritten by someone else's wounds? This isn't about blame, it's about awareness. Because the most dangerous people in your life are often not the ones who seek to control you, but the ones who don't even know they're doing it. And unless you learn to recognize them, you will keep bleeding from wounds that were never yours to begin with. So, are you sure you know who's truly safe to let into your mind? You've been there. Maybe it's a friend, maybe a parent, maybe a partner who seems fragile, sensitive, wounded in ways you can't quite describe. You listen to them, you show up for them, you give, and you give, and you give, and yet somehow it never feels like enough. There's always another emotional crisis, another meltdown, another conversation that ends with you drained, confused, and quietly angry at yourself for feeling exhausted. You tell yourself to be patient. You remind yourself that they're going through a lot. You rationalize the mood swings, the guilt trips, the subtle emotional hooks they cast into your chest like fishing lines, tugging just enough to keep you from swimming away, but never hard enough to feel justified in cutting the cord. And over time, something strange begins to happen. You start doubting yourself. You begin to question your memory, your reactions, and your right to feel what you feel. You find yourself walking on eggshells, rehearsing conversations before they happen, censoring your words, not out of fear, but out of habit. You wake up tired, not just physically, but spiritually, as if someone has been draining you in your sleep. But here's the thing, you can't explain why. They haven't done anything bad. They haven't shouted at you, or hit you, or insulted you. In fact, they often cry in front of you. They thank you for your support. They call you the only one who truly understands them. They say they couldn't survive without you. So why do you feel like you're slowly disappearing? Why do you feel guilty for needing space? Why do you carry anxiety that isn't yours, grief that isn't yours, shame that isn't yours? Carl Jung would say, that's the problem. What you're experiencing isn't cruelty. It's an unconscious invasion, a psychological spillover, the invisible transfer of unprocessed emotional energy from one psyche to another. And it happens all the time. You see, when someone has not dealt with their own darkness, their traumas, their shadows, their unresolved emotions, that darkness doesn't just sit quietly inside them. It leaks, it seeks, it looks for a host. And the perfect host is the empath, the helper, the one who was raised to fix everyone else's feelings before even understanding their own. If this is resonating, you're not alone. Jung's work sheds light on a truth most people avoid, that emotional entanglement isn't always the result of manipulation. Sometimes it's the byproduct of unconscious projection. And the most dangerous thing about it, you don't realize it's happening. Not until it's too late. Not until you're buried beneath layers of emotional responsibility that were never yours to begin with. Not until you find yourself apologizing for your own exhaustion. Not until you forget what your own silence sounds like. So here's the real question. Why have you made it your job to carry feelings that don't belong to you? Where did you learn that your worth was tied to your emotional availability? And more importantly, how do you begin to separate what's yours from what never was? This isn't just a question of self-care. It's a matter of survival, of psychic sovereignty. Because if you continue absorbing the unconscious projections of those around you, you will eventually forget who you are outside of their emotional needs. This video, and the psychological insight of Carl Jung, is your mirror, your warning, and your invitation to draw a boundary, to pull the plug on the emotional circuits you never consented to connect, to reclaim your mind before someone else's shadow consumes it entirely. Carl Jung once wrote, "What we do not confront in ourselves, we will encounter as fate." Most people read that and think it's poetic, philosophical, abstract. But if you've ever felt like your life was spiraling in emotional patterns you couldn't explain, like you were reliving the same relationship with different people, the same pain with different faces, then you've already experienced what Jung meant. This isn't a metaphor, it's mechanics, psychological mechanics. And one of the most powerful forces in Jung's framework, the one that silently governs most of our interactions, is projection. So, what is projection? It's what happens when someone refuses to face something within themselves and unconsciously pushes it onto you. Their fear, their shame, their guilt, their unacknowledged rage, their unprocessed grief. Instead of owning it, they deposit it into your psychological space. And if you're not aware, you won't even notice it happening. You'll just feel heavy, like you're carrying something, but you don't know what. You'll find yourself trying to fix what you didn't break, apologizing for things you didn't cause, taking responsibility for someone else's emotional landscape as if it were your own. That's projection. It's invisible, it's automatic, and it's deadly to your sense of self. Imagine standing in front of a broken mirror, but instead of seeing the cracks as part of the glass, the person looking into it thinks you are the one who's fractured, that you are the source of their discontent. So they react, not to you as you are, but to the broken reflection they've cast onto your face. And the more sensitive you are, the more intuitive, open, or emotionally attuned, the more likely you are to accept that reflection as real. That's the trap. Jung believed that projection is the most common and most dangerous defense mechanism of the unconscious, because it doesn't just distort how others see you. It can completely reshape how you see yourself. Let's break it down. When someone doesn't want to confront their own insecurity, they might accuse you of being arrogant. When they deny their own aggression, they label you as hostile. When they repress their own shame, they make you feel like a disappointment, even when you've done nothing wrong. The tragedy? Most of this happens without any conscious intent. It's not evil, it's not calculated, it's reflexive. And that's why it's so dangerous, because you don't need to be manipulated to be affected. All it takes is proximity to someone who has refused to integrate their shadow, the darker, hidden parts of themselves that they can't accept, and your psyche becomes the screen onto which they project the film of their unresolved past. You stop being a person in their eyes, you become a symbol, an archetype, a villain in a story you never agreed to play in. And if you're not careful, you'll start playing the role they've assigned to you. That's the final act of projection, when you lose yourself in someone else's psychological movie. Jung warned us, the less you know about your own unconscious, the more power it has to hijack your life and the lives of those around you. And unless we begin to develop what he called inner work, we are all at risk of projecting our disowned parts onto others. But here's the twist. Projection isn't just something that happens to you, it's also something you do. We all do. Every time we judge without understanding, every time we react instead of reflect, every time we feel triggered by someone else's behavior, we should ask, what part of me is being touched here? Because as much as this video is about protecting yourself from the unconscious of others, It's also about holding the mirror back up to yourself. Jung didn't create these theories to help you avoid people. He created them so you could awaken, so you could individuate, become whole by recognizing what's truly yours and what never was. So now, with that understanding, we move into the core of this journey. Let's meet the 6 most dangerous psychological profiles Jung warned us about. Not because they are evil, but because they are blind to the very forces that govern them. And in their blindness, they may be carrying your soul away with them, piece by piece. 6 dangerous people Carl Jung warned us about. A. The unconscious manipulator. They don't raise their voice. They don't lash out or insult you. In fact, they often seem deeply vulnerable, fragile even. But don't be fooled. Their power lies not in domination, but in emotional absorption. These are the people who make you feel responsible for their emotions. If they're angry, it's because you triggered them. If they're sad, it's because you disappointed them. If they feel empty, it's because you weren't present enough. Over time, their pain becomes your burden, and their chaos becomes your responsibility. Jung warned us about this psychic sleight of hand. When a person refuses to face their internal wounds, those wounds seek expression, often through others. You become the canvas, the scapegoat, the surrogate soul for their unresolved suffering, and they don't even know they're doing it. This isn't manipulation by design. It's projection in its most seductive form. B. The bearer of the persona. They are polite, composed, well-spoken, everything society praises. They're the perfect colleague, the ideal partner, the shining example of restraint. But behind that socially acceptable exterior lies a haunting absence: authenticity. Jung called this mask the persona, the role we play to adapt to the world. While we all use it to some extent, the bearer of the persona becomes lost in it. They believe they are the mask. Interactions with them feel scripted, polished, hollow. You sense the absence of something raw, real, or spontaneous. And if you dare to show emotional depth or imperfection, they retreat, subtly pressuring you to conform to the performance. Living around such people forces you to edit yourself. You mirror their mask, and slowly, the real you begins to fade, sacrificed at the altar of playing it safe. C. The repressed shadow owner. They seem disciplined, orderly, morally upright, the epitome of control. But beneath that control simmers a storm. Jung described the shadow as the parts of ourselves we deny: envy, anger, desire, and ambition. When these parts are repressed, they don't disappear. They ferment, they fester, and eventually they explode. The repressed shadow owner is like a pressure cooker. Small frustrations build silently until a trivial moment, a misplaced comment, a minor disagreement, sets off a disproportionate emotional reaction. You find yourself shocked by their sudden rage or cold withdrawal, wondering where it came from. This person isn't evil, but by denying their shadow, they've become a danger to themselves and to you, because what is not expressed consciously will erupt unconsciously, often when you least expect it. D. The moral controller. They claim to live by principle. They speak of ethics, virtue, righteousness, and they expect you to do the same. But beneath this moral high ground lies a psychological trap. These individuals weaponize morality, using it to shame, guilt, and dominate others. They don't just judge behaviors, they judge being. Jung explored this archetype in his writings on the Christ and Antichrist. The moral controller sees themselves as a beacon of light, yet refuses to confront their own darkness. Instead, they project that darkness onto the people around them, condemning in others what they cannot accept in themselves. You'll hear phrases like, "I'm just being honest," or "it's for your own good." But these aren't truths. They're mechanisms of control, cloaked in virtue. And the longer you stay near them, the more you begin to believe that your natural desires are sins in disguise. E. The complexed person. One day they love you. The next day they withdraw or accuse. A harmless joke turns into a fight. A moment of closeness becomes a trigger. You feel like you're living in an emotional minefield. That's because you are. Jung described complexes as autonomous fragments of the psyche, formed by trauma and unresolved pain. These fragments behave like inner personalities, erupting unpredictably and hijacking rational thought. The complexed person doesn't act from the present, they act from past wounds. They aren't always harmful, and that's what makes it confusing. There are moments of genuine connection, laughter, and love. But just when you begin to feel safe, their inner storm resurfaces, and you're caught in its path. And so you adapt. You silence your truth. You shrink yourself to avoid setting them off. But no amount of self-editing will save you, because their pain was never yours to fix. The psychic vampire. They don't shout. They don't demand, but somehow every interaction with them leaves you empty. Not just tired, hollow. These are the people who don't want your presence. They want your energy, and they'll drain it drop by drop, under the guise of affection, dependence, or need. They'll say they can't do it without you, that no one understands them like you do, that you're their only light. At first, this feels meaningful, even noble, but eventually, you realize you're being consumed, and yet, when you pull away, you're the villain. Cold, selfish, abandoning. Jung would call this a pathological fusion, a psychic entanglement where boundaries dissolve and identities blur. You don't know where they end and you begin, and by the time you realize what's happening, your vitality is already gone. It's easy to point fingers, to label others as toxic, manipulative, and emotionally unstable, to analyze their behavior through the lens of Jung and conclude with quiet confidence that you've simply been the victim, the one who feels too much, gives too much, endures too much. But what if the danger isn't just out there? What if it's in here, within you? This is the part no one wants to talk about, the uncomfortable truth beneath all psychological insight, that everything we project onto others is, at some level, a reflection of ourselves. The manipulator, the performer, the controller, the wounded, the vampire, these are not just people we've encountered. They are also archetypes that live within the human psyche. Yours, mine, all of ours. Jung didn't write about these patterns so we could weaponize them against the people who've hurt us. He wrote about them so we could wake up to the reality that we too carry unconscious material, and if left unexamined, it will act out in our relationships, in our emotional habits, in the quiet ways we pull from others what we refuse to give ourselves. So take a breath and ask yourself honestly, have you ever made someone else responsible for your emotions? Have you worn a mask to gain approval, hiding the real you because it felt safer? Have you judged others for desires you were secretly ashamed of in yourself? Have you punished someone for stepping on a wound they didn't even know existed? Have you needed someone so deeply you began to mistake their energy for your own? None of this makes you bad. It makes you human. And yet, the danger of not acknowledging these parts is profound. Because what we deny, we don't control. And what we don't control, eventually controls us. This is what Jung meant when he said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. But he also meant something else, something even more radical. The path to wholeness begins when we stop blaming and start integrating. When we stop asking, who did this to me? And start asking, what in me allowed this dynamic to continue? It's not about shame, it's about sovereignty. Because the real threat to your freedom isn't the unconscious of others, it's your own unconscious willingness to absorb it. It's your habit of rescuing, your need to be needed, your reluctance to confront the parts of yourself that are angry, needy, bitter, or afraid. These are not bad emotions, they're simply unacknowledged. And the longer you suppress them, the more they show up. Through the people you attract, the situations you repeat, the pain you can't explain. So here's your invitation, not to judge yourself, but to observe yourself, to look at the emotional patterns you've lived through and ask, what were they trying to teach me about myself? To revisit the roles you've played, the healer, the savior, the martyr, and ask, did anyone ever ask me to take on that role? Or did I give it to myself? To consider, not just how others have projected onto you, but how often you've projected your wounds, fears, and unmet needs onto them. Because the moment you do that, the moment you see it clearly, the game changes. You step out of the drama, you stop being a character in someone else's unconscious story, and you begin, maybe for the first time, to become the author of your own. Carl Jung believed that healing doesn't come from perfection. It comes from integration, from owning the light and the shadow, the power and the pain, the awareness that you are both the mirror and the reflection. So before we move forward, ask yourself, which of these 6 archetypes lives within you, even just a little? And can you meet that part of yourself with compassion, not fear? Because in the end, the only thing more dangerous than being around unconscious people is living unconsciously inside your own mind. You've come this far, through the shadows, the masks, the projections, the emotional vampires, and the truth we rarely want to face. That some of the most dangerous forces in your life weren't intentional at all. They were unconscious. And perhaps the most liberating realization of all is this: you don't need to fight anyone to become free. You simply need to stop being the mirror. Stop reflecting the wounds that aren't yours. Stop absorbing guilt that was never meant for you. Stop making room in your soul for other people's shadows to stretch and take root. Carl Jung's work was not about creating enemies out of others. It was about dissolving the battlefield within. About recognizing that the victim, the manipulator, the savior, the destroyer, they are all roles that arise when we live unconsciously. When we don't ask why, we do what we do. When we let fear or conditioning steer the wheel of our psyche. You've likely spent years trying to be a good person, a kind person, an understanding person. But let me ask you this: at what cost? What parts of yourself have you buried just to keep the peace? What truths have you silenced to avoid discomfort? What fragments of your identity have been traded away to make someone else feel whole? It doesn't have to continue. There is a different path, one that doesn't require war, only awareness. Not rebellion, but recognition. Not fighting the darkness, but turning on the light within you. Because once you see clearly, the spell breaks. You no longer fall for the same stories, the same emotional loops. You begin to respond, not react. You pause before absorbing. You set boundaries, not as walls, but as sacred lines of protection for your peace. And slowly, you begin to feel what freedom actually is. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of self. Jung taught that the journey of individuation, the process of becoming whole, begins the moment you stop outsourcing your identity to the emotions, needs, and shadows of others. It begins when you turn inward and ask, who am I, without the roles I've played for everyone else? You are not here to carry everyone. You are not here to fix what others refuse to face. You are not here to be the container for someone else's rage, sorrow, or fear. You are here to awaken, to integrate, to become sovereign over your own inner world. And if that means walking away from people who confuse love with dependency, from environments that mistake obedience for virtue, from relationships that only exist when you shrink yourself, then so be it. You owe no one your soul. So today I invite you to reclaim it, not with noise, but with clarity. Not with vengeance, but with vision. Not by burning bridges, but by building stronger foundations inside yourself. You are not broken. You are not too sensitive. You are not selfish for choosing peace. You are awakening. And that is the most sacred thing a person can do. To stop living as a projection of someone else's unconscious and start becoming the conscious author of their own life. So take a breath. Let this moment be the beginning of something radical. A life where your energy is yours, your identity is yours, your path is yours. Because when you stop reflecting the unconscious of others, something extraordinary happens. You finally see yourself, and from that moment on, the healing begins. Not by fixing others, but by fully returning home to you. If this message spoke to something deep inside you, If it made you pause, reflect, or even feel a little more seen, then this is just the beginning. Click like if this resonated. Subscribe to the channel if you're ready for more content that doesn't just inform, but transforms. Every week, we dive deeper into the unconscious, into philosophy, into the art of becoming who you truly are. And I want to hear from you. In the comments below, tell me, which part of this video hit you the hardest? What insight did you need to hear most? And what part of yourself are you ready to reclaim? Your voice matters here, and your story might just awaken someone else. This journey isn't about perfection, it's about waking up together.